So my name is Rebecca Brierly, and I am the Community Reconciliation Program Manager at St. Ethelburger's Center in London. And we're so happy to have you join us for this conversation with Jo Luehmann on, is there a new dawn for us beyond our dark night of the soul? So we have about an hour together, probably just a bit over an hour. And how this is going to work is I'll just give you a brief background of St. Ethelburger's, and then I'll introduce Jo. And I have a few questions that I'm dying to ask her, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the group. And then we'll close with a brief meditation at the end. And I just want to say that everyone is very, very welcome here. People of all faiths and none, people who are feeling really full of hope today, and people who are feeling overwhelmed. All of that is very, very welcome. We're going to record this webinar. We'll record it right now. I'm looking at all your beautiful faces, but we'll record this in speaker view, so it is so you won't be seen on the recording unless you choose to speak. So feel free to have your camera on or off, and please do use the chat box just to say, you know, who you are, where you're joining us from, and any comments or questions that you have. And especially when we open it up for conversation, it'd be great to have your questions in the chat box as well. So first of all, I would really love to tell you just a brief bit about St. Ethelburger's Center. So we are a multi-faith center based in London. We are a maker of peacemakers, and we build community resilience for times of ecological and social emergency. Our vision is for a just and peaceful, inclusive world that's rooted in care for each other and our common home. And we have four main values that guide our work, and I'm going to just tell you what those are using four very brief stories of place and of the land that we're based. So the first story is about who we're named after. So we're named after Saint Ethelburger, who was the first abbess of Barking Monastery in London in the 6th century. And she led one of the first religious houses for women. Her faith in Jesus inspired her to take radically compassionate action by caring for her community in the midst of a plague. And instead of closing the doors and simply praying for her community, she opened the doors and commended her nuns to reach out in service. And this speaks to our first value, which is putting our faith, whatever it may be, into action. And the second value is based in the very ground the center was built on. So it's been consecrated for worship since the 12th century. And it has endured fires, wars, bombs, urbanization. And it once was the tallest building on the street. And now it's the smallest for sure. And it's surrounded by 50-story skyscrapers. Some of you have been there and you know it well. And this speaks to our second value, which is that we serve to protect the sacred. Our third value is based on the story of the actual building. And so it was used as a church for hundreds of years, but in April of 1993, the IRA detonated a bomb that was meant to destroy the banking district. Our church building was collateral damage, but 70% of it was destroyed. And the land could have been sold off, and that could have been the end of our story, but a small group of people decided that they wanted to write a new story. And so they rebuilt it, and they opened it in 2006 as a peace center. And it speaks to our third value of seeking the opportunity in crisis. And the fourth and final value is about the work that we do now. After the 7/7 bombings here in London, much of our work was centered around interfaith dialogue and helping to cultivate understanding and friendship. And so to help facilitate those meetings, we actually built an Islamic style peace garden and a Bedouin tent in the back of our church in the courtyard. And that has been used for hundreds of mediations and conversations and deeply spiritual moments. And this speaks to our fourth value, which is building community across difference. So those are our four values: seeking the opportunity in crisis, putting our faith into action, protecting the sacred, and building community across difference. So that's helpful to keep in mind as we speak today. So that's a bit about Sanatha Burgers. And the main reason that we're all here is that I want to give a very, very warm welcome to Jo Luehmann. Jo is joining us all the way from San Diego. Thank you so much for being here, Jo. I know that you and like many others have had a very restless and not a lot of sleep last night as we were watching the US election results unfold. And so firstly, I would just love for you to introduce yourself to the group and give us a brief background about your faith journey.
Well, good afternoon there. Good morning here. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm excited to have this conversation that I think after a long night, I think it's good for us. A long night and a very, a night of a lot of emotions. It's good for us to have. Well, I'm a pastor and I'm an educator. I moved to the US about 14 years ago from Colombia. I came here to do an internship and to get my master's degree, and I worked inside of evangelical churches for 10 years. And as I kept getting closer and closer to, as I kept getting more involved, I guess, and getting more opportunity to do things inside of the church and inside of networks of churches, I was growing a little bit disillusioned with my job and the reality that my faith wasn't aligning with what I was doing. And in one of my classes at my master's degree program, a pastor who was also a teacher and he ran an inner city church here in San Diego that did a lot of work with immigrants and refugees. He asked the question, if the communities you were serving, if your church disappeared from the communities that you're serving right now, would the community be better, indifferent, or worse? And that question kept resonating in my head throughout my years of working inside of the church. And I got to a place where I said, honestly, it would either be indifferent or better. And I had, if your job disappearing, if your job is gone and the community is made better or it's indifferent of it, then perhaps you're not doing your job all that well. So I had to grapple with that, and that meant, a lot of conflict, and which meant I had to leave. I quit my job, I left, and started reimagining what doing church and community and showing up as a pastor in the world looks like. That led to deconstruction and decolonizing of my own faith. And so that's basically how I'm here. A lot of my work as a pastor now, as an educator, is to reimagine the ways in which we express our faith, and also grapple with the fact that our faith has been used in ways that harm people, that it has married systems of oppression, that therefore we have to be actively divesting from systems of oppression so that our faith doesn't harm others, but instead it really is, if we are in a community, we are making it better, truly better for everyone. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of what I do and how I ended up doing it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's so amazing. And we'll post in the chat box as well links to your website and to your Instagram and Twitter page, and so people can follow along with this journey if that's something that they're resonating with. So you have gone on this personal journey of understanding what your faith means to you, and a way for it to be inclusive to everybody, like you just said. So over the past few decades, I've been noticing, both in the US and the UK, there's been a growing number of people who maybe are questioning the more traditional expressions of their faith. You spoke about in your lens, and certainly I'm the same background, coming from an evangelical Christian background, but they are entering this period of questioning, and some may call it a wilderness. So this period of undoing, of dismantling, of decolonizing, of questioning. So I have two questions around that for you. So firstly, why is that wilderness important and essential for us, particularly right now? So something to welcome and not necessarily something to be afraid of. And secondly, in times of that crisis or wilderness, I feel like it's totally human to want to hold on to something because it's scary and it's unfamiliar. And I feel like we're seeing that in the election results. We're seeing people be afraid and double down on something that feels secure to them. And so what encouragement or practical advice would you offer us, for those of us that are in that place of spiritual wilderness? So first, why is it important? And second, do you have any advice?
I love the wilderness. Now, the wilderness it's such a beautiful topic for me, because it's a place that we all have been faced with, you know, or we will be faced with if we haven't. It's a place of questions and darkness, and it's lonely, but it's also a place of uncertainty and a steadiness, but it's also a place of growth and maturity and opportunity. So the wilderness is really, to me, an invitation, and we can enter the wilderness willingly. We can we can be shoved into it, or we can avoid it. Or, I'm sorry, or we can avoid it
Yeah.
our whole lives and miss out on what it has to offer. But regardless of how we encounter it, it is an invitation to meet with ourselves and be stripped of that which is not serving us anymore, which is really scary, because then the things that we carry are often the things that have made us feel safe. You know, the things that have traditionally made us feel safe. But not everything that makes us feel safe or has served us always is serving us right now, or is safe for all of us right now. And so we carry coping mechanisms with us to avoid looking at the pain and grappling with the pain that we all have to grapple with. And we don't want to look at the trauma that we've gone through. We don't want to look at the trauma that we may have caused too. We don't want to face the mirror. And when you walk into the wilderness, you are forced with that mirror. You are forced with grappling with the pain and saying, okay, how has this pain, first, how has it shaped me? And second, how have I caused it then? Caused it for others because it's shaped me. So the wilderness is the only place where we get to meet our true selves. And we can learn to love ourselves. We cannot learn to love ourselves until we actually meet ourselves. And we cannot learn to love the other until we love ourselves, because then everything that we do, every choice that we make, every decision, it's really protection, you know? And there is a term that people use, and oh, I forgot what it's not trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is what went to my brain, but it's just making decisions based on trauma instead of making decisions because it's who we are. It's because it's what we want to do. So we get all this trauma, you know, shoved into us because of systems of oppression, or because of indoctrination, because of whatever it may be, because of wars, because of everything that has happened in the world in the last, you know, always. And we have all this trauma, and if we don't grapple with the trauma and heal from the trauma, every decision we make is a decision to protect us from that same trauma. So you have people that went through world wars that hoard a lot of things, and the hoarding is not because they are selfish or because they want more. It's a trauma response. That's it. It's trauma response. Our decisions, trauma responses, really, to keep us safe. So there is no scarcity anymore, but the hoarding is a trauma response because there may be, and what their ancestors or maybe themselves went through was scary, and you know, their life was on the line. So we continue to make decisions based on trauma that we may have not lived at all, or that is not a reality anymore. And the wilderness says you don't have to do that anymore. You have to go face your trauma and come back to yourself. Come back to yourself to be safe, to be truly safe. So Brené Brown we talked about Brené Brown briefly before this started, but Brené Brown talks about courage a lot in her book, Braving the Wilderness, because the wilderness is the unknown. You know, it's a stepping into the unknown, because the known isn't good for us anymore. And that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of letting go of those things that we don't think we can let go of. So the reimagining that I'm doing of how do we do church, how do we do faith, this reimagining it's courageous, because it means we have to let go of some things, and we don't know what we're going to find on the other. It's braving the wilderness. I just saw your comment, braving the wilderness. We don't know what's on the other side. We don't know what we're going to find, and we are not guaranteed that it's going to be good. But what we don't realize in that process is that when we go and meet ourselves, we really do truly find something that's better for us. But in that process, we have to shed so much trauma and so much pain, and we have to shed so much conditioning that the pain makes it feel like it's not better first. But we end up going far enough into the wilderness that we find ourselves and we find our people. Brené says that too. And then I'll go into the opportunity, you know, so safety is very important for us. Humans are looking for safety naturally. And the safest place for us should be our own selves. We've been told to find safety in others, in things, in systems, in governments, in, you know, what, in our parents, in whatever. But really, the safest place in the world for us should be found within us. Due to trauma, that's not where we find ourselves. That's not, we don't, you know, we've been so disconnected from our true self that we don't find safety within us. We don't even know how to trust ourselves. So coping becomes appropriate to feel safe, but coping is complicated when you conflate it with healing. Coping is not healing. And so we have societally allowed for like acceptable coping mechanisms and unacceptable coping mechanisms. So you have people that are dealing with addictions, and that's coping. That's all people are doing. People that have alcohol addictions or drug addictions, they are really just coping with trauma in the only way that they can, in the best way that they can, considering the tools that they have and the trauma that they've gone through. But church and faith and work are also coping mechanisms, or can be also coping mechanisms, but they are acceptable coping mechanisms, you know. And the government, like trusting the government or trusting certain elites, is a coping mechanism to not feel the fear of perhaps this whole entire society thing is not on their hands but ours. And we have to take hold of the fact that we get to play a role in shaping the way in which we do life, in which we do society, in which we show up together. And that's scary. It's easier to just say, listen, I'll vote and I'll work and I'll stay safe myself, but I don't want to engage any further than that, because that's just too much responsibility. That's scary. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough, or whatever it is that we've been told. When in reality, the invitation is the opposite. The invitation is together we get to reimagine these, and together we get to hold accountable, and together we get to shape a society, because we can trust ourselves, because we are the safest place for not only ourselves, but also for our descendants. And when I talk about descendants, I'm not talking about those of us who have actual biological children, but also for those of us who don't. Our descendants, and anybody that comes behind us is going to be our descendant. And what we leave behind matters. So if we are grappling for safety outside of ourselves, we are going to leave behind trauma, right? We're going to leave behind a world that was created under trauma. But if we continue to move toward the wilderness and become safe ourselves, then we are leaving behind a world that we created because we were true to ourselves, because we listened to what some people call the wisdom within, the Holy Spirit, because we leaned in and listened to one another and cared for one another. So really, the wilderness is an opportunity to do that, to face our fears and to stop looking for safety elsewhere, but find it within us. So it can never be taken away, regardless of the situation, regardless of how horrible the world may, you know, react to whatever. We will be safe because we have ourselves. And that's a beautiful opportunity for me.
Wow. Wow. That's so amazing. Yeah, I really hear that. We talk a lot about at St. Ethelburgers about that, the important work of facing reality. And I know, like in restorative justice processes, restorative practices, there's the telling the truth bit that has to happen first. Mm-hmm. So what I hear you saying is that the wilderness provides us an opportunity to do that. It's to face reality. It's to face the truth. And I think I really hear you on how important it is to do that inner peace work with ourselves, to be at peace with ourselves, so that we trust ourselves and that we feel safe, that is not dependent on anyone else, so that we can brave the wilderness. I'm really, really hearing that. My second question for you is, and also just to encourage people, if you have comments or questions, please do put them in the chat box. We will open it up for times for people to ask questions, and it would be great to see what those are. Okay, so while we're in this wilderness, if we can treat it as an opportunity, a truth-telling exercise, a place to meet ourselves, to learn to feel safe with ourselves, we'll undoubtedly, in that process, remain in relationship with people that are not making that same journey, or who maybe resent the wilderness or find it scary. And so we will be in relationship with those people who think and see it entirely differently to us. And we're seeing that again in the frame of the US election results. We are seeing there were some people that were saying, oh no, this is going to be a landslide. Biden's going to win. It's going to be a no-brainer. But what we're seeing actually is this closeness of the race is just demonstrating that there is still this huge polarization in the states, right? And we see that too here in the UK as well. So with that being the case, how do we lead with the heart of a peacemaker amidst polarization, where we don't just speak to and bring with people who think like us, but how do we genuinely build community that will pull together across these differences? I'm thinking especially of you in the States over the next few days and weeks. How can we be peacemakers? How do we pull together?
Yeah.
Questions though.
Some people are having to deal with it in very personal ways. This is their families. This is their close friends. Like this division, this schism that we are seeing is not really something that is happening out there. It's something that is happening here with all of us in our communities, with our people. And I think that for me, it's important to center the marginalized in everything that I do. The marginalized are always centered. Everything I do and however I think centers the marginalized. So I don't think how will my vote affect me, but how will my vote affect the most disenfranchised, the most marginalized in society right now. And the reason that I do that is because if we ensure that the most marginalized are safe and well, we will all be well, because it'll trickle up. That's what we want. Things never trickle down in the hierarchy of acceptability in society that we've created, but things do move up. Because we will ensure that if they are well, everybody else above them, it's going to be better even. So unfortunately, and that way we start changing the narratives and we start changing the way in which we do things. But the truth is that division is there. And we can only repair it by moving toward the disenfranchised and listening to them. And what I have noticed happens a lot in the US, particularly, and everywhere really, but in the US more so, because of American exceptionalism and the belief that America is a different country and so much better, which is in the psyche of the US people, not necessarily consciously for everybody, but it's right there, is that the US is very, there is the schism between the marginalized and the privileged is great. It's too great here in the US. And I'm not talking about just the marginalized in the US. I'm talking about the most marginalized in the world. People in the US are so disconnected from how the marginalized live. I am an immigrant and I did the immigration process, which took years, and it was a lot of money and it was a lot of time and it was stressful. People have no idea how immigration processes work. So they make decisions about immigrants, but they have never had to get close to, they have never, actually made the effort of saying, wait, what does it mean to you? What does it look like to be an immigrant? What does it cost you to be an immigrant? Because it's costly to be an immigrant in the US and anywhere, I think. So I was telling my husband recently, everywhere I go in this country, I am an other. Regardless of my passport, everywhere I go, I am an other. The moment I open my mouth and they hear my accent, I am an other. Now, for him, when he goes to Colombia, he is like celebrated. People are like, oh my gosh, thank you for coming to our country. And everybody's so happy that he's there, because we are more, those who are further away from the center, from being the privileged, we are more used to looking at the other. We've been pushed to look at the other. But those who are privileged, which is the case with people in the US or in the UK, the privileged don't ever have to look away from the center. They are safe right there. So this schism, it's right there, and we have to confront it, and we have to start holding the privileged accountable, and educating and asking them to walk away from complacency and apathy by looking at the marginalized, by listening to the marginalized. As we magnify because nobody needs to be a voice for the marginalized. They have their own. So as we magnify the voices of the marginalized, as we ask people, can you look that way? As we put our light, a spotlight on the marginalized and say, can we make decisions that will help them? Because we will be fine regardless, we will. If we look at them, could we just listen to see that every decision, every policy that we make, perhaps helps really all of us? And really, this is well, I see that because of my background and because of my faith, I see this as an invitation to participate in the work of divinity in the world, instead of missing out because of the fear that's kept us from seeing beyond ourselves. Because it is my belief that divinity and God are found in the margins more often than not. And by that, I mean the people in the margins are so deeply connected to divinity because to themselves, because that's the way that they have to survive. And so if we look their way, we're going to find divinity. And if we look their way, we're going to be able to also find the ways in which we can make this place heaven on earth. And to me, heaven on earth is, which we'll talk about in a minute too, but heaven on earth is a place where everybody is well, where we're all okay, where there is no suffering, though there may be pain. But that will never stop happening if we don't look at those who are suffering the most and maybe suffering because of us. And I think that the hardest part for people here is comprehending that even though we are saying you're complicit in this, we are not saying you're bad. We're just saying you're complicit. Could you consider how you are complicit? And because you are complicit, could you consider how you could live in a way that you divest from all of these systems that may help you, but don't help anybody else? Unfortunately, people hear that as you're bad, you're bad. So I think that helping them see and have a lot of conversations, and the difference between having these conversations for a person in the margins and having this conversation for someone that's not in the margins is trauma. So for somebody to say, if I try to explain how living in poverty is and I'm poor, and you are denying my reality, that's traumatizing for me. Well, poverty is not that bad. You're not in it. I'm here. I'm living it out. I may have not enough. I don't have enough to feed my children. I had to make a lot of decisions that are painful. So for the marginalized to have those conversations with the privileged is painful and traumatizing. That's why we uplift their voices, but that doesn't mean we move them and say, hey, you need to talk to them and educate. We just uplift their voices. Now, for those of us who have privilege in some areas, it is our job to have conversations with those who are on the other side of this conversation, with those who feel like these systems of oppression don't exist, for instance. Because for us, it's not traumatizing, So if we're going to talk about the harms of patriarchy, which we're still feeling today, it's a lot easier for a man to talk to another man about the harms of patriarchy than for a woman to have to sit down and have to explain, this actually hurts me, it harms me. So wherever it is that we hold privilege in society, whether it be wealth or education or skin color, wherever it is, the language that we speak, wherever it is that we hold privilege, we have an opportunity then to be bridge makers, to make the bridge between that schism that is created between the privileged and the marginalized. So we get to ask ourselves, where is it that I have privilege, and can I be a bridge there to magnify the voices of the marginalized and hold the privilege to account so that they have to look. So I push them to look to the margins.
Oh, yes. And we talk in Zen Burgers about what I'm hearing you say is about standing in solidarity with people, right? It's to use our position, our privilege, our power to stand in solidarity and to help asking others to have empathy, or to see it from other people's perspectives. Yes, that is so important.
It is.
I'm trying to write notes myself for myself as well at the same time. So my last question for you before I pass it over to the rest of the group, and do feel free, everyone, still to write your comments and questions if you want in the box, or you can, in a moment unmute your mics and ask in person. So my last question is, 2020 has been this year of crisis. We've had the pandemic, we've had, catastrophic weather events caused by the climate collapse. There's this rise in polarization, over racism. And in many cases, it's not like it's new, but it's shining a light, right, on the systemic injustices that were there and have been a part of our world. And maybe we just weren't seeing the reality and the truth that was the truth for so many people. So yeah, at Zen we've talked about it in this, you have said it all, Jo. We talk about this importance of facing reality, standing in solidarity in order to take radically compassionate action. And that's where the prophetic, courageous leadership comes in. You know, this moment is going to require us to step out in faith, to be courageous and have prophetic leadership. The prophetic bit is about seeing and naming. You know, when I think of the prophets, certainly from my faith of the Old Testament, it's about this people pointing and saying, look, this is what's happening and this is what's to come. So if you could speak generally, what action do you think people of faith are being called to right now? What kind of prophetic leadership do we need? And really, what do you believe the opportunity there is in this crisis as we count down the days to the end of this year and we look ahead to 2021, which may look different and it may not, but what is the opportunity for us? So yeah, what action do we need to take, and what's the opportunity?
I'm having the opportunity right now to teach a class on Christian hegemony. And I know that, you know, not everybody's Christian. However, Christian hegemony means that there is a dominance of Christianity in the West. And there has been for, you know, a while. So what that means is that there is a lot of Christian values and a lot of Christian realities that have shaped the world as we know it today in the West, that have shaped the way in which we engage with one another, that have shaped the way in which we do families and in which we do authority and in which we do pretty much everything. So right now we really have an opportunity to question our faith and to question how people say that faith is not political. I don't think there is anything more political than faith. There's nothing more political than faith. It has been for always. You know, I have been reading about how the king in England became appointed by God. This was a political move that King Henry VIII was making. It was a political move that he was making because he wanted to separate from the Catholic Church. So there has been these political moves all the time that affect us today and that affect the way in which we do society. And we have an opportunity right now to question all of those things and to say, does that really kind of what happened to my own faith, but in a macro level? If Christianity disappeared from the world, if we erased Christianity from history, if we could, imagine that we could, if we erased faith and religion, organized religion, I mean by that, not spirituality and a connection to the divine, but organized religion. If we erased it from history, would the world be better? Would it be indifferent, or would it be worse? And we have to be honest, a lot of it would be better. You know, a lot of it. We are talking about the Crusades, and we're talking about what's happening in the US right now. A lot of the schism is religious in nature, is the belief that if you're not doing things in a Christian way, and Christian is defined very narrowly, then it won't be good. You know, and we're talking about the creation of the other. The Muslims are the infidels and we have to convert them. We're talking about colonization and the erasure of entire people groups in America and Africa. So what does that mean? It means that we have to sit down and wonder the ways in which we do life, regardless of our faith background, because of Christian hegemony, are the ways in which we are doing life that are informed by Christianity. Are they serving us? Are they good for us together, collectively? We build, I was talking to someone about how it is so easy for people to want authoritarian figures. You know, it feels safe because that's what we've been indoctrinated into, right? So we are raised in families where there is an authoritarian parent, usually an authoritarian father, but it can be a mother too. So we have an authoritarian parent, and we tell children all the time, you do not know better. You cannot trust yourself. What you need to do is trust me and do what I say. And we never tell them they get to. You know, we never say like, oh, now you get to trust it. Because when they turn 18, it's not like we say that to them, because we have not built an entire, you know, movement, or we haven't moved with them through helping them trust themselves, to listening to their own selves, to being safe within themselves, the opposite. So what happens? They get out of our homes, and then they go into the world and look for authoritarian figures to feel safe again. So they find jobs, and they, you know, are inside of societies where they are like, it's good to have these authoritarian figures. So we have to question, and that means reimagining the hierarchies that we've created. What does it look like to have communities without hierarchies? Is it possible? I think it is. It's going to take a lot of imagining, though, and it's going to take a lot of working on our biases. What are the biases that we have been indoctrinated into, that we have been told are final realities? And are we willing to be courageous enough to question those? What are the things that we've been told about family? What are the things that we've been told about the other, whoever the other is? What are the things that we've been told about trans people and about gay people and about immigrants? What are the things that we've been told about all of these things and people and the ways in which we show up for one another? And are we willing to question whether that is good for us or not? Are we willing to question whether that is true? And that's hard and painful, because then we have to say, oh, I have biases that are harmful and painful, that I have done harm. I am a part of the problem. What are the things that we've been told about the rich? And we have to ask these questions, because whether we make it conscious or not, it's there. And it's informing the way in which we show up in the world. My friend was telling me, she said, it was this random thing, but she said, I should have been saving more. She's buying a home right now. And she said, I should have been saving more. And I said, what do you mean? She works over 40 hours a week. She's a social worker. It's a hard work. But we've been told all these ideas that we don't get to spend money. We don't get to enjoy life. She's a Black woman. We don't get to enjoy life. We don't have to save all the time. We also get to enjoy life. We also get to show up. And if we're working 40 hours a week, surely we should be taken care of inside of this society. Surely we could go to dinner. Surely we could travel. We have to reimagine a world where we are not living to survive, but we're truly being able to exist. And that means questioning pretty much everything, parenting and our government. And I think we can reimagine and take steps slowly, so that we don't shock the system, but take steps slowly to create and build a society where we really are well, where we can say, this is really good for all of us. It really is. But it's going to take a lot of personal work first, definitely. And a lot of education too, the willingness to be educated. It's easier to not be educated. It's easier to not know. It's a lot easier. And the only ones that get that privilege are the ones that are higher up in this societal hierarchy that we invented. The rest of us have to be educated. We have to, so that we protect ourselves. And I think we're moving. And this is the thing. I don't want to be hopeless about it. We are moving in that direction. The world has changed in amazing ways in the last 100 years. The amount of people that die by violence today is significantly lower than the amount of people that have died by violence in history. We are moving that way. And with the internet having the ability to get closer to perhaps identities that we didn't have access to before, is making it easier for us to see the other, to be closer, to create societies and to imagine worlds where we're all together and where we're all well, where we're serving one another and not serving ourselves for the purpose of protection. So I think we are moving in that direction. It's just the movement is slow and sometimes can be discouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the way that I'm hearing what you're saying, Justine Huxley, who is the CEO of St. Ethelberger Center, she's been reflecting on recently about how during this time of crisis and wilderness, we can keep asking out of safety, when do we get to go back to normal? When do we get to return? When does life get to return, back to normal? And, if we can be brave enough to maybe face up, maybe it's not the returning to normal, but it's the reimagining of what is yet to be and what is yet to come, that we just have to start to work to see what is possible and what the new can be rather than the returning, right? And you're so right that we're only going to get there if we can reimagine and do it together, because I can reimagine a certain world and you can reimagine it differently to me. And that's the beauty of listening, like you said, to other people's perspectives. I love that. Thank you for answering my questions. I'm just noticing in the chat box, There's two questions that I can see. And if you would like to write any more of your questions, people, but Wendy May, I saw that your question was first, and then I'm going to ask Francesca's question. But Wendy May, do you want to say more about what you mean about that? What the difference is between?
I was wondering what you felt the difference between pain and suffering is. And I always think that suffering is because Jesus suffered, that comforts me when I'm suffering. So I'm just wondering where you're coming from in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the difference between pain and suffering is important because, as I said, pain is unavoidable, suffering isn't. I'm sorry. Yes, that pain is unavoidable, but we can avoid suffering. So to me, suffering is unaddressed pain. Just unaddressed pain, staying in pain, not doing anything about the pain people are going through when there is an option to do something. Leaving people in those states where they are in pain and not addressing it. So it's the difference between harm and trauma, or harm and abuse. I'm sorry, harm and abuse. Harm is I do it once. Abuse is I do it repeatedly and do nothing about it. That becomes abuse. So I think that we move towards a world where pain is unavoidable because pain helps us know where we need to fix something. We need pain. Pain is good. Pain is where we say, okay, this is not working. This is hurting people. This is hurting me. But suffering, we don't have to allow or tolerate suffering. Suffering is just shrugging our shoulders, basically. So the society that I think we should reimagine is a society where we not only are okay with pain and we embrace pain, but where we also say it will always be, we will always look at it. We will always address it because pain is an opportunity to grow. Pain is an opportunity to do better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy May, for the question too. Thank you, Jo. So secondly, I see there's this question here from Francesco. And his question, I mean, I can let you ask it too. I'll ask you to unmute, Francesco. So you are unmuted now.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I thank you very much for that. Really beautiful. My question, just to make it short, is related to what you were saying about being courageous, both to go and look for our own selves as well as to kind of take action into the world and against the paradigm. However, there is a lot of other people out there which are, that they don't have that willingness you talked about of educate themselves, and they stand in ignorance. So the question is like, how can, for instance, my courage of the willingness of doing something, my own work and trying to bring into the world, meet the ignorance of other people that are kind of somehow you're seeing, kind of like affecting where we're going?
Yeah. I just read your question too, and talking about, how if it weren't Christianity, would it have been something else anyways? And I think, yes, it would have. And because the thing is, what we're talking about, right? It's trauma and people trying to stay safe. Now, trauma is not an excuse for abuse, but trauma is often the reason for it. So I think that we have to continue to move toward, and first also set boundaries, because like I said, if it's not safe for me to have a conversation, if it's going to be re-traumatizing for me, then I simply just don't engage. There is somebody else that can have that conversation with them. But I also think that investing in education, not only for ourselves, but for those that are coming behind us, and focusing on that and investing in the education of the marginalized too. So that's where the centering of the marginalized matters the most. So I don't focus so much on, for me, I don't focus so much on educating the more powerful. I focus a lot on educating the more marginalized, because the reality is the more powerful are not even that many, and they don't want to be educated on these. But the more that we educate the more marginalized and the ones that are being traumatized by the systems of oppression, the more that we together can create change, because there is more of us, there is more people in the world being marginalized. If you ask basically 90% of the world, if there are areas in which they are being marginalized, they will say yes. There is an area in which they are being marginalized. So if we are able to center the marginalized, educate the marginalized, offer more tools to the marginalized, then together we will grow more powerful to be able to say to the more powerful, we will not tolerate this anymore. And I believe I believe in peacemaking literally too. I don't believe in violence, though I understand when it happens, when the marginalized grow so weary that they become violent. But I believe that we can actually make these changes by holding accountable and saying we will just not tolerate it. By teaching the marginalized, what does it look like to set boundaries? What does it look like to go to work and not accept certain, what would happen if all of us that work in the world say to corporations, we will not accept these terms anymore. We won't accept them. We won't. It's not acceptable. My brother, I have a young brother who just became an American, like a resident. He works for Walmart. That's the only job he could find in the middle of a pandemic. So he's been working for Walmart for 3 months, and he works a lot, and his job is not fun, and he gets paid $10 an hour, and which is nothing, and he just got a promotion. The promotion is more responsibility without more money. And I was telling him, like, why did you accept the promotion? And he's like, well, because I don't have to clean the bathrooms now, and that's good. And I was like, so we keep accepting to be able to stay out of doing certain things. But what if we all together empowered one another, and we're empowered to say, we will not tolerate this. I need you to do better. Because if he does it, they'll just fire him. But if we do it together, they have to make change. If we become, the solidarity thing again, if we show up and say, it's not just about me being well, but all of us, then they have to make change. So putting pressure on those who are going to be well no matter what, together, means that we have to educate and give more tools and give more safety protections to the most marginalized, so that they can set boundaries and say, this will not be tolerable anymore, not for me and not for anybody else.
Yeah, thank you so much. Francesco, did you have any other follow-up questions to that, or?
No, that was beautiful. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Francesca, and thank you, Jo. I'm also seeing Anand. I really love that comment. It looks like it could be a question as well. So I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I'm sorry if I'm not. Anand, did you want to say more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll read out the question first, what I just wrote here, which is I'd love to hear more about the healthy functional possibilities that can be essentially psychological processes that can be lifted out of the religious context, like all these words I put down, so atonement, forgiveness, redemption, confession, repentance, absolution, etc., as a means to psychological well-being. This came up recently because I never read the Bible. I wasn't brought up religious. And I was looking at trauma resolution, and when you integrate subpersonalities back into the being, it does sound a lot like the kind of the prodigal son story, and whatever you've done, you can be invited back home. Mm-hmm. And so this has been on my mind recently, and so I only signed up for this today. So I'm kind of interested about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater with religious development. And just on that last point, I've looked a lot at adult stage development throughout the centuries, and it's a very natural progression to go from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric. And therefore this middle stage of having ideology, them and us, is a normal stage in human development, and therefore it's not all bad. That's what I'm kind of saying. It's got pros and cons, but it's a stepping stone to where we're going, and we are where we are in human history. So this particular one, given that you're a pastor and the background in Christianity, I'd like to hear your take on that.
I do a lot of these. A lot of these. Let's talk about what forgiveness really means. Let's talk about what sin really means. And that's part of the deconstructing of our faith and deconstructing of terms that perhaps are, people of faith, especially Christian people, are so acquainted with all of these terms, but they don't really know what they mean. I've encountered a lot of people, they don't really know what it means. So when we're talking about, hey, could we reimagine the world? And I like to talk about heaven on earth. What does it look like to move toward heaven on earth? What is heaven on earth? When we're talking about, well, how can we divest from systems of oppression? I talk about repentance. What does it look to repent? What does repentance look like? And what does it mean for us? What is our responsibility in repentance? Because if repentance doesn't come with making amends and apologizing properly, then it's not true repentance, right? It's not truly repenting if we are not saying, hey, what have we done wrong? How have we harmed people? And how can we change that? How can we actively make sure that we don't do that again? So, and that actually is a great way to make people face their own faith and say, what does sin look like? You know, because sin is a great word that Christians love to throw. Like, well, it's just sin. It's just sin. Well, what is sin? Can we talk about what sin is then?
Yeah.
Because nobody knows what sin is. If everybody gets to decide what sin is, then sin means nothing. But what if we talked about sin as ways in which people act when they are under trauma, you know, as coping mechanisms that are unhealthy for them, and conscious coping mechanisms. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the word sin, where it comes from, is when you're shooting an arrow and you miss the target, right, and you're off track. So I love the fact that it has a context that's completely not from good, bad, right, wrong. You just miss the mark. Yeah.
And if we look at it as that, you know, missing the mark, then could it be that we're missing the mark in society? And therefore, this is a sinful society, not in that we're going to go to hell sinful, but in the we're missing the mark. We have an opportunity to stop missing the mark, because we just throw all these words, but we don't really know what they mean. What is the mark then? You know, can we come back to, we want to hit the mark, which the mark is heaven on earth, heaven for everyone, which means a place where people aren't suffering. And we're certainly missing that one.
Well, we're on the way, let's say.
Right. So yeah, using all of these words as an invitation. I love to talk about not reincarnation, but when Jesus came back. Why is the word
resurrection?
Resurrection. Thank you. I like to talk about resurrection a lot in the terms of what does it mean to resurrect ourselves? You know, if we were all created in the image of God, which means we are, you know, there is no flaw really. We were created how we were meant to be. And then we get shoved into this society where we are conditioned and traumatized into something. What does it mean to resurrect the one we were created to be in? You know, because it's been killed in a way. We are living in our subconscious mind, just making decisions due to trauma, subconsciously trying to protect ourselves. What does it mean to be awakened and to live consciously, to make decisions consciously, because it's aligned to the one that we were created to be. It's aligned to ourselves, to divinity in a way. And so I like to talk about resurrection in those terms instead of focusing so much on whether Jesus resurrected or not, because at this point, it really isn't all that relevant. It might be important for some in their faith, and that's fine. But what does resurrection mean for me today, right now? And how can I be resurrected to the reality of who I was created to be, and therefore show up in the world as my true self, which to me is the Christ, the divinity embodied in a way. So yeah, that's my work. I don't want to throw Christianity. I think it's beautiful. I want to reimagine it so that we can. It's really truly beautiful. The insightful commentary that you find in the Bible about human development and human behavior and societal, you know, issues it's impressive, truly.
I should read it, really. I should have a read. I should put it on my reading list.
Yeah, but you know, if you look at most ancient books of wisdom, that's the case. Like, ancient books of wisdom are insightful and beautiful, and they can teach us so much. I think that's a way that our ancestors are wanting to teach us, but not for the purpose of everybody has to believe the same thing, but instead, could we look at the Bible, or could we look at the Vedas, or could we look at any other ancient, the Popol Vuh? Could we look at these books as our ancestors are teaching us what happened to them, so that we don't do the same, so that we learn from them?
It's just a final comment. I'm really happy what you said earlier about removing conditioning and programming. And I don't know how old you are, and I won't ask because that's not polite. But given my age, our generation had to slough off a lot of hereditary and generational trauma. And what I'm seeing is there's a lot of younger people coming through that really don't have that heaviness. They're not attached in the same way. And they tend to, the ones I've seen, the ones who aren't completely lost, are more aligned with who they're being. They're connected to their beingness. And they haven't lost that. And hopefully there'll be more and more people like that. And then our lot still has some work to do. Well, I won't include you in that, my lot.
I think that all of these things that are happening in the world are making a lot of us do that, you know. They are. So I'm hopeful. I really am. I am kind of hopeful pessimistic. That's exactly me. I'm a
Hopeful,
hopeful.
realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, NM, for those questions and comments. And thank you, Joe, for that thoughtful response. And just to say that people can read more about your work. Joe, if you could actually write in the chat box, like the links to your website and your Twitter and your Instagram account, where I know you do a lot of your work there. And so you can do that in a minute. But Joe, just one last question before I want to just guide us all through just a few minutes of silence to bring this to some kind of meaningful closure for all of us. But Joe, just very briefly, what in speaking of terms in resurrection and hope, what are you going to do today practically to keep that hope alive, or maybe over today and tomorrow and the next day after that? Just to leave us with a very personal, insight into how you might be keeping your hope.
Well, my kids are my greatest teachers. I have 4, and I get today the opportunity to talk to them and to process this with them. And I'm looking forward to it, even though they might be a little bit disappointed. But I'm looking forward to it so that we can talk about what does it mean for us, and what is, because the kids are naturally hopeful and naturally solution, like they find solutions to things, and they reimagine because they don't have the constricts, they don't money, they're like, no big deal, like it's fine. So I'm excited to talk to my kids. I'm excited for them to give me ideas about what this looks like. And then I'm also teaching a class tonight on Christian hegemony, and I'm definitely going to have it's 25 people just sitting there. We're going to be talking about these things. To me, having these conversations is important. So I'm going to be hosting another conversation where we talk about what does it look for us now to show up for our neighbors. And by that, I mean, for me, for instance, in San Diego, my literal neighbors in Tijuana, right there, this is very real for them. And the effects of this election are going to be felt very personally. So what does it mean to show up there? What does it mean to be there? So I'm excited for the reimagining. I think that opportunity to reimagine and to think about the world in different ways. What could we have? The possibilities are really endless. What could we have? It fills me up with hope. So I'm hoping we all take minutes and time to just sit with people in our lives and with ourselves too, and say, what is it that we could have? Yeah. How do we move there? How do I move there? Just that's all I can do. Move me there.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's so true that, it's being present to the people that are right in front of us. So to end, the way that we sometimes end things here at St. Ethelburgers is just a few moments of silence. So if I could invite us all into just a few moments of silence together, and then I'll close for us. So I invite you just to sit comfortably, and if you would like to, I invite you to close your eyes if that's helpful, and just to be aware of your body, to be aware of your breath, and take a few deep breaths. And I invite you to notice how you are feeling about all that we have talked about this idea of wilderness, about facing reality, about facing truth, about standing in solidarity with others, the marginalized, about being bridges to others, about being peacemakers, about bringing the work of divinity to the people around us. I invite you to notice your feelings about the election or about the coming lockdown. And I invite you to welcome all of those feelings with grace and turn that feeling into a prayer of sorts, of hope, or of a crying out. And as you hold in your mind the next few days and weeks, I invite you just to take a minute or two of quiet right now to ask yourself, what is mine to do as a peacemaker in our homes, our families, our neighbors, our faith communities? What is mine to do? So I will leave just 2 minutes of silence. Thank you so much. I want to thank you all for joining us. Jo, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for bringing light and peace and your ideas and your passions. I will send the recording to all of you who have been here today, and I will send the links through that Jo will give me to her work if you're interested. And I just, thank you all so much for being here. We have another few sessions in these series, and we gather once a month for something that we call soul space, which is more opportunity to be contemplative and to meditate and pray and have conversation together. And the next one that is happening is next Wednesday, and the info is on our St. Ethelburger's page. But blessings to you all today. Jo, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here.